What does a pharmacist do? Well, most people might answer that a pharmacist dispenses the medications that my doctor prescribes. Now, I work with a ton of great pharmacists, and one thing that I don't generally see is excitement about pills in a vial. And this is probably because pharmacists have been trained to do so much more. So what can you get excited about in your community? To find out, let's go beyond the scripts. I'm going to fast forward to present day. In a relatively short time at Panama, you've been able to implement all these changes, get your patients on board, get your staff on board with these changes. And one of the things that you'll hear if you talk with any independent is, you mentioned stepping in a puddle, but the reality of the third party and PBM landscape for a lot of independents is it's a real puddle to step in. So Florida specifically has had some big changes recently. So let's talk a little bit about kind of your role in advocacy and what you've seen happen in the past couple years in Florida. I know the SB 1550, and I think it's the 1559.
Yeah. So Senate Bill 1550 and House Bill 1509. Those represented absolutely some of the most all-encompassing, robust changes that any pharmacy legislation, I think, not just in the state of Florida, but I think for most states. And I think that I was just one part of it, but I mean, I was happy to have been a part of it and happy to continue to be a part of it. So, again, as everyone knows who is an independent pharmacy owner or has a role in an independent pharmacy, it has gotten so tough, even more just in the past 5 to 10 years since I really became involved in independent community pharmacy. And one thing that I found very quickly and was, I guess, morbidly somewhat refreshing was that I wasn't the only one suffering under this, because everyone that you would talk to, all had the same problems. And that made me feel good, because it wasn't just me with one or now 2 stores, but it was the guy who is in the Midwest who has 10, 15, 20 stores. Like, they're still all feeling it. So I'm like, okay, good. It's not just a small problem. It's not just a city problem. It's not just a rural problem. Everyone can kind of connect on this, which means everyone is going to, feel the same pain. And from my standpoint, I was fine griping about it. And I certainly did my share of griping about it. But I fully believed, and I think that most people hopefully will believe, that it's one thing to complain about it, but if you're just going to complain about it and not try to do anything about it, then you're really not doing anything about it. I mean, you can complain till the cows come home, but it doesn't matter if you're not actually trying to do something to fix it. And so I knew that I had to get involved in this, and we had some great success this year. But I'll tell you that this is probably the fifth, 6th year that I've been involved at a state level, pretty intimately pushing for change in our industry. And it was tough. Florida has long been known as kind of a live and let live state. The government just politically doesn't see a role to put its hand in every facet of different parts of life. So
which
first,
normally I love.
I mean, sure, right? I mean, I think that, our message has always been, hey, we get it, and if you want to be, the best free market advocate possible, that's great, as long as a lawmaker you recognize that in the PBM landscape and in the insurance landscape for pharmacy, not just independent community pharmacy, but there were plenty of grocery store pharmacies and other big box pharmacies that were standing right behind me saying, hey, this isn't a free market, so there's no way that this is going to work. So the first couple of years, we had a lot of doors shut in our face, and we had a lot of resistance. We heard lawmakers say things like, we're not really sure if there is a PBM problem. We're not really sure if Florida should care whether or not pharmacies go out of business. I mean, those were just frank conversations that were had with us. And so the first years were just educating. It was just, I mean, the system by design is very complex and opaque. So just educating a lawmaker and giving them the tools that they need to even begin to wrap their heads around what the problem is and how to fix it. I mean, it's difficult to explain to someone that's in the industry all of the problems that are associated with our industry at times. So explaining to someone who is, a realtor or a school teacher or a small business owner unrelated to our industry or something like that, it's very difficult for them to understand as a lawmaker, but they need to, because they can't enact change, or they can't,
Sure.
reliably vote for or against something if they don't know what the problem is. So for the first few years, that was really what we were faced with, and we had a lot of defeat, and it was difficult. And I'll tell you that there were times where it was very enticing to just say, oh well, let's just do cash compounding and all this and just swear off the whole system. But it's like, I knew, I mean, selfishly, that still, there's a lot at stake in the third party system, and a lot of people have insurance. And so just squaring yourself off from a lot of that is a little bit like shooting yourself in the foot. But I mean, just from a more, like, it's not right. Like,
Yeah.
I take care of people in my community. They come to us. They deserve to be taken care of, and I need to be able to do it the best that I can, and I can't do it under the current system. So things really started to change within the past 2 to 3 years in Florida. Some of it was definitely because, we were educating lawmakers relentlessly on these issues. So it wasn't, the state of Florida, the state legislature in Florida has a 60-day window to create and pass and affect laws. So you can't start on day one with, okay, what does PBM stand for? Like, if you start there, you're
Right.
never going to get anything affected. So for the first few years, it was just getting lawmakers to the point where they understood the nuts and bolts of the issue, so that then they could decide for themselves, okay, what does this look like in Florida, and how do we fix it in Florida? That was one thing. And then the other thing is, not just myself, but a lot of other pharmacists decided to do the same thing and put their money where their mouth was, and say, okay, if we're going to whine and cry about it, then we're also going to be part of the change. And we actually had 2 pharmacists in this state that decided, well, okay, if that's what it takes, then I'll run for office. And we had 2 pharmacists run for state legislature and both get elected to their office. So it was a great thing to have colleagues in the state legislature that could help be our best advocates because I mean, I was taking days off to go to our state capitol and advocate, but you can't be there all the time, and you can't be in every meeting, and you can't be in every speaking engagement, all that kind of stuff. But your colleagues can, your colleagues that are elected there can. So that was really big for us. And then our Governor DeSantis, had a problem with his insurance at a big PBM pharmacy. And so that
Eureka.
happened, and so he became engaged on the issue. His staff became engaged on the issue. And then I think the more that you got lawmakers talking, the more you realize they each kind of had a story that led back to the same thing, which is this market is distorted somehow. There are problems where if I'm having a problem here, she's having a problem here, they're having a problem over here. They were all, when they got together, having different problems with the pharmaceutical system in the state, and they all realized that something could be done about it, something, had to be done about it. So, I mean, from there, in my mind, it was a lot of grassroots, like pharmacists, and that's something that we still have a lot of work to do on in general, but just there are independent community pharmacies in every corner of every state in this country. So our ability to connect with, lawmakers locally, people who can affect change locally, whether it's business owners in your area, small business owners that come to your pharmacy, lawmakers that come to your pharmacy, just a lot of people come through our doors that have connections and that you can make connections through. So for us, it was just a grassroots ability to meet with and educate and constantly, be a thorn in the side of lawmakers until they really, understood it, poured a lot of time into it, and then did what was best, not just for small businesses like ours, but for consumers, and made sure that, everything looked to be a healthier market in our state. So that's something that I've been very proud of. It wasn't any kind of secret sauce or silver bullet. It was just persistence, and it's hard. And
Yeah.
sometimes you just want to give up, but we didn't, and it really, really paid off. And I think it's just the beginning, not just for our state, but for a lot of states. And even now we're seeing federally that I think there'll be a lot of change for us and for our patients as long as we continue to press and be persistent.
Yeah. And I mean, from a lawmaker's point of view, you have to also consider that, right now there's probably a couple of citrus farmers having the same conversation about how they need to, really engage with their legislator, and they're getting that same persistence from so many different industries that you do have to continue to be vocal and make sure that you're not just sending a letter and, well, I tried, but that persistence that you talked about is, I think, what really makes that, eventually come around. Maybe this year's not the year, but next year, because they've heard it and they've heard it and they've heard it, and then they did have that one connection, and you never know, but when that one connection is going to be the one that has that eureka moment.
That's right. Absolutely. And it's just something, like I said, you run the risk of, you don't want to be the flavor of the month, or you don't want to be yesterday's news. So I think that, and that's something that we continue to talk about here in Florida, is like, we did really, really great, but that was yesterday. And now it's like,
Yeah.
what are we going to do today? And what are we looking forward to tomorrow? Because for so many years, we've been on defense in Florida, and we've been just trying to beat back all of the very, very anti-small business, pro multi-billion-dollar conglomerate when it comes to the insurance space and the PBM space. So now we're kind of like, okay, that's fine. And we've kind of beat them back, but now it's like, now you need to go on the offensive. Now you need to really stake your claim to what you're going to look like as the top of your licensed healthcare practitioner in your field. And what do you need legislatively in order to do? And I know that sounds really easy when we're just talking about it, but it's like, that's really what needs to be done, is like, okay, that's great, but like, let's not rest on our laurels. Let's make sure that we have a clear picture of what comes next year, what comes the year after, what comes the next, to make sure that you have a roadmap of not just sustainability, but of, ability to thrive in your practice.
Yeah. So practically, what does 2024 look like for Florida pharmacies that's different than other states? Because I know right now everybody's planning for that, switching to the real time and that DIR apocalypse of the first quarter. But realistically, what are you going to experience differently in Florida, do you think?
Yeah, I think we're very encouraged by a lot of the pro-consumer, pro-pharmacy language that was passed in our legislature this past year. I think one of the biggest things for consumers is a requirement for PBMs to pass 100% of all rebates paid to them from manufacturers directly to the point of sale at the pharmacy counter. So I think that's one of the biggest things that we'll see, because we'll see, like my insurance, for example, is a high deductible health plan. So I know every January my copays are a lot higher than they normally are. But the ability for those high deductibles, 20% of a bigger number is a bigger number. So the ability for those rebates to be passed through means that now that 20% coinsurance is lower than what you would have paid this year, because it's based on the net price of the drug and not the list price of the drug. That is a huge thing. And I think that will save a lot of people good money at the counter. I think that it will save employers a lot of money in their plan design as well, because you won't see those rebates being retained by PBM. So I think that's one of the biggest things for consumers that we'll see. One of the other things is Florida, it's not a secret, is home to a very large retired population. And people want choice. They don't want to be pushed into going to a specific pharmacy or having to use a certain mail order for some of their medicines or specialty medicines that have to be, obtained through a specific channel only. And the legislature's banning of obligations for, nonsensical accreditation requirements and very onerous, fees and applications in order to participate in certain networks or specialty networks, or requiring a patient to use a mail order pharmacy, or forcing them out of the pharmacy relationship that they're into now and mandating that they go to the mail. The elimination of that in Florida is great because, again, that's pro-consumer choice. That's not the legislature giving a handout and saying, little pharmacies are going to get something that they are not allowed to have right now. That's not. If mail order is truly what's best for the consumer, then the consumer will pick it, right? Like, that's that invisible hand that people talk about. Like, if it's better and it competes, then people will use it. But as I know, and as a lot of people know, it's not better. People use it because they have to. So now that the consumer is allowed to just pick, I think that we will find, and they will find, better healthcare outcomes overall because they'll be where they're most comfortable and where they're best able to receive their care. So, I mean, that's a huge deal. And not without, to say there are some provisions in our bill that are specific to not just small business pharmacies, but all pharmacies from a business standpoint. Things like having MAC appeals be rooted specifically in actual acquisition costs. They can't just make up a MAC and say, oh, well, so sorry. I mean, what stops a PBM from saying all MACs for all drugs are a penny per tablet? Nothing right now in Florida, but now it will, and it has to be grounded in actual proof. Things like transaction fees. I mean, you get multi-billion-dollar companies. You're using, their PBM for their health insurance, for their insured member, and yet they're charging, $50 credentialing fees, $250 re-credentialing fees. That stuff being able to be abolished in the state of Florida really helps to level the playing field. Again, not just we heard when we were advocating for this bill from a grocery store pharmacy that said, hey, how can we help you guys with this? How can we help push this effort forward? Because that was something that was very eye-opening to me, because I figured I'm just two pharmacies, a grocery store pharmacy or a department store pharmacy or whatever. Those guys, they got hundreds of stores. This place had 800-900 stores across, several states. And I'm thinking, of course they can negotiate. But the more we found out, no, it's just as bad, if not worse, sometimes for them than it is for independently owned pharmacies. So just hearing that they will have, a say and a lift and an improvement from some of the changes that we're making here is a great argument for us to say, look, this isn't, again, a handout for, mom and pop pharmacies. This is something that's going to help the industry as a whole in this state and will lead to better patient outcomes. So it's very encouraging, and we're just, pins and needles waiting to see what happens January 1st. And we know there's going to be problems. We know that from other states, the PBMs may just put their fingers in their ears and refuse to comply, or they may try to sue on some basis that's not in fact. But we're ready for that, and we're anticipating, a continuance of our fights. Like I said, we're not done. We're not just going to rest on our laurels. We're going to make sure that we fight for what we've already earned and continue to fight for what is to come next for our patients.
Yeah. What's interesting is you said, the grocery store, surely they can negotiate, and it's almost just the opposite. It's the grocery stores are able to, plan for having their prescriptions almost as a loss leader so they can sell milk. So it's
Florida
kind of crazy.
Florida has a really great public records law. So it's very, very, that's why anytime you hear like Florida man, like anybody that talks about Florida man, that's not just because we have like crazier people in Florida.
I promised I wasn't going to bring that up.
but it's definitely because our records are just very, very open, and we have very, very broad public records. But one of the things that does is any state-funded plans you can find any information you want about any state-funded plans. So that's one thing that we did at the Florida Pharmacy Association is we said, hey, we want records from Medicaid. We want to see what everything was paid for in Medicaid. And they have to, by law, comply. So they drug their feet a little bit, but they gave us millions and millions of rows of tables straight from their databases of like every claim that Florida Medicaid had paid to any pharmacy in the state within the past 10 years. So, I mean, at that point, it's golden for us because now we're not talking about antitrust. We're not talking about, oh, it's antitrust if I ask the grocery store pharmacy what they get paid or if they ask me what I get paid. There's no antitrust now because it's all public records. So I was able to see what pharmacies were getting paid in the state of Florida. And it was mind-numbing when you'd see the PBM, who also owns the brick and mortar pharmacy, paying themselves, I mean, sometimes 10 to 50 times more than they were paying competitor pharmacies for the same drug. And it was really cool. Again, I mean, they gave us their entire, I mean, it was basically like they just gave us their database tables. And so we worked with some great pharmacy industry leaders to put that in a more graphical format. And I mean, we were able to drill down and see claims for my pharmacy, a drug that I billed on a particular day, billed at a big box chain pharmacy for the same claim, for the same plan, on the same day. And we could prove to lawmakers, we're talking about, I mean, you can't get any more uniform than that. We're talking about the same day, the same claim, the same drug, the same quantity, the same NDC, and showing that I was getting $12 while the chain pharmacy was getting $400. And that kind of thing, like you can't, but I mean, that was to the point when we started opening eyes like that. That was when, there was a lawmaker, and I'll never forget this because, I mean, again, I told you a few years ago, we were having lawmakers tell us, we don't even know if there's a problem with PBMs. Like, we're not sure that PBMs are the bad guys. And now I remember about a month ago, one of the lawmakers said in his closing statement after they had voted yes on our bill, he said, I'll tell you right now that some of these people that had testified against PBM practices were probably more polite than I would be. And the lawmaker went on to say, he said, I'll tell you right now that if it were me, that we would be sharpening our pitchforks right now. And he said, I don't know what to say to you except repent. Get ready, because for what you've done, there was a lady that had testified that day that said that, her cancer medicine was delayed by 3 weeks because she had to use a mail order pharmacy and couldn't get her medicine in time. And so she was delayed with her cancer treatments. And he said, when you hear people like that, when you affect people's lives like that for greed, just be ready, because I know, and that people will burn in hell for things like that. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. So, I mean, the progress that we've made in this state, and I think the progress that remains to be made in other states are such that those kinds of stories, those kinds of grassroots efforts will absolutely change people's minds and make your advocates your biggest allies as well.
Yeah. I mean, that transparency is just what has been missing for so many years. And I think you've done an amazing job of articulating that in a way that's very easy for somebody who has a limited knowledge of the industry to really consume and kind of see the players and see the scoreboard. And hopefully we can add a link in the show notes, because on May 23rd, 2023, you had the testimony to the United States Committee on Oversight and Accountability. And that PDF, I've got it bookmarked. The written testimony I thought was so concise and passionate and to the point that I think that's really the kind of thing that it's hard not to catch, that contagious passion of there is a problem here. So hopefully I can put that in the show notes so that everybody can read that. But tell me a little bit about that experience, because I was really excited to see that when I found the link.
So it was pretty cool. So I was with my wife and my daughter at the Taylor Swift concert, and I got an email And so I'm just, whatever. I'm sitting there reading my emails while they're enjoying the concert, and it's like it's something about House testimony, and I was sure because just the previous week I had talked to the Florida State House, so I was thinking that someone had wanted to discuss some comments that I had made at the Florida State House, and I started reading it, and I said, "Oh, that says House.gov. They're talking about the House, like the People's House." So I thought, "Oh shoot, this is kind of big right here." So, so I start texting some people, and I was like, "Is this for real?" And, like I still, I was like, I'm getting gagged or something like that. Like, this is just, for fun, like somebody's playing a joke on us. So, I emailed him back and I said, okay, that sounds great. I would love to talk to you. So, it's like he sent me like a Teams meeting link or whatever. And I'm thinking maybe they just want like a little bit of background from me or, so we start talking and they're like, hey, we saw what you talked about in the Florida House because, we saw the recording of it. We listened to what you said. We're interested in what you had to say. I had made some comments about the TRICARE program because Jacksonville's a big military town. We have 2 Navy bases. We have a Marine battalion detachment here as well. Like, it's a big military town. So I had made some comments about TRICARE, which at the state level, TRICARE is a federal program. So I don't really talk about TRICARE a lot at the state level because there's really nothing that they can do about it. They hate it. They wish that more pharmacies could participate in the network and that the network was more fair, but it's a state problem. I mean, it's a federal problem, and the state's not really going to be able to do anything about it. But I had made some comments just because it's frustrating, and we're a Navy town, and I like to let people know about what's going on in our corner of the world, and TRICARE was a big problem, continues to be a big problem for us then. So anyway, I had made some comments, and someone at the Florida House, or at Congress, hey, we want to talk to you about that. So we started talking on Zoom, and I started telling him like, oh yeah, here's the problem. And I'm telling him about TRICARE and how terrible it's been and how a lot of our Navy guys had been left out in the cold by it. And I'm talking about all the other stuff and PBMs. And I said, man, this, at the end of the call, I was like, man, this is really great. Like, I'm so glad you guys are looking at this. I didn't really have a lot of concept on what happens at the federal level. I was really focused on state level. And I was like, I hope whatever you guys are doing is really great, and I hope that I helped in whatever way I could. And then like a couple of days later, they're like, hey, we're going to send you a letter, and we want you to come and testify. And I was like, oh, God. Okay. So that was cool. I really didn't know what to expect. I purposefully did not look at anything from that the U.S. House had done because like I didn't want to be pigeonholed into like whatever they had already done before. But I had to write some comments, so I wrote those comments. I appreciate your thoughts on the comments. I just tried to tell them, like, hey, it's hard. Like, that was my message, is it is hard right now. And thankfully, we have 2 pharmacists in Congress, Buddy Carter and Rep. Marshbarger, that are great advocates for us up there. And again, they can only do so much, and they rely on a lot of, people like us to come up and tell our stories too. So I got to go up there. I didn't know what to expect. I knew that I was on a panel with a physician and with a PBM exec. So I was like, okay, I don't know what this is going to be like. I'm sitting right next to a PBM executive. Like, is this just going to be like, are we going to get into some fisticuffs later or something like that? But actually, it was Greg Baker who does a fully transparent PBM. He works with Mark Cuban on his Cost Plus program. And so we talked a little bit before the committee panel got started, and he was like, listen, I'm not that guy. We hate the traditional PBMs too. And so I appreciated that. And his comments were spot on. He despises and loathes traditional PBM practices, opaque, spread pricing, rebate, retaining, and things like that, just as much as we do. So it was really really eye opening, really enlightening. I won't lie, it was a big stage. Like I brought my wife and my kids with me because I just thought like, okay, if Dad's gonna do this, then you guys got to come and see that too. And so that was a really good opportunity for them, and it was very awesome for them to be able to see what I had the privilege of being able to do on behalf of our patients and our colleagues. And the committee itself was way different because in federal Congress, they have everything stacked all at once. So you'd have a member come in, they'd sit down, they'd talk to you, they'd take their 5 minutes or whatever, and then they'd leave, and then the next person would come. So it's like you can't see that on C-SPAN or whatever, but like the gallery is mostly empty. Like there's very few members that actually stay there. So at first it was like very unnerving for me because like they would come in, they would take their 5 minutes with me and then they'd leave. And then somebody else would come in, they'd take 5 minutes from me and then they'd leave. And I was like, oh, this is weird, And then like you end up having to repeat yourself a lot because they asked a question that somebody else already asked. They want to hear it from you too. But it was good because like, I mean, I talked to some people that had, been on a big stage like that before. And they're like, hey, Kevin, like, they put their pants on one leg at a time too. Like you elected these people. They work for us. Like, half of them, don't know anything about your industry anyway. So they're listening to what you say and they just want to hear so just tell them a story. And so I think that's what I tried to do. And I hope that's how I came across to them. And the feedback that we got was really, really good. I think that overall it was very, very impactful to them. Some of them you could tell like just frank disgust because these were things that are happening in my neck of the woods, but they may not have heard about or may not be seeing in their neck of the woods. But the fact that it's happening with taxpayer funded dollars and programs that are meant to help everyone and that are instead being perverted into enriching some big PBMs and stuff like that, you could tell really resonated with them. And so I think that that is something that is definitely on the horizon for them. It's funny because I'm mostly a private person. So like, I didn't tell a lot of people, like I told a few friends that I was going. I didn't tell a lot of people that I was going, a lot of colleagues and stuff, it was just, whatever. And one of the things that I thought was just the funniest was there was an exchange that was made between myself and a representative. And it had to do with her inability. She had a problem at a pharmacy. And she said, my birth control was too expensive. You already know what I'm talking about. So, and she was asking the questions to me, and she said, well, that's how I came up with my youngest son.
Yeah, it's cheaper to have the child.
Right, and it's funny, but at the moment, I'm like, yes, ma'am. All right, I understand. I know that happens every day for people in my pharmacy.
Yeah.
And so the next 2 or 3 weeks after that, people are sending stuff to me and they're like, did you know that this video of you on TikTok has 3 million views right now? I was like, oh gosh, I hope that the only thing that people don't remember about me being there for like 6 hours to testify was that I got asked a question about how not being able to afford your birth control leads to more kids. But it was funny and it definitely provided some levity. And I mean, people who I hadn't talked to in 10 years are texting me this video saying, hey, you got 5 million views right now. Did you know that you're viral? And I'm like, oh.
Yeah, she gave a delivery that was definitely destined for TikTok. So that was fantastic.
Yeah, but it was great. I was so glad I had the experience. And I mean, I was honored to do it because I know that, for every person, for every funny anecdote like that, for every patient that is able to access services, there's a ton of people who are not, and we have to keep fighting for them. So it was very important for me to be able to do that for us.
Right now, if you talk to a lot of independents in pharmacy, there's, definitely some stepped in a puddle feelings of having a hard time keeping that positive outlook. But it really seems like through transparency, through that persistent voice of independent pharmacy and of NCPA and people like you who are really making sure that they're staying on that front line, that it definitely seems that positive change is in the way. So like what do you see in the future? Do you see, do you see that positive change that's going to make it all the way down to the pharmacy books? How do you feel about the future?
I think it's bright. I mean, I know some people will probably make fun of me for saying that because I know that it doesn't look great right now. Like it can be cliche to say always darkest before the dawn. But I mean, like, I really think what we have right now is tremendous momentum. Like, it's not just in Florida. It's not just in the Southeast. But it's nationwide right now. Like, people are waking up to seeing what these, corporations are doing and that it is to the detriment of the public at large. So I think that now is the time If you have been disengaged or have kind of let it fall by the wayside in your own advocacy efforts to re-engage and to hop back on the train, because I really do think that there is a positive outlook. I mean, I think that there will be change. I think that, there are definitely some things I tell students that I precept all the time. It's like, pharmacy is the one place right now that incentivizes sick people, because if you fill more prescriptions, you make more money. And that's like, antithetical to everything that we want healthcare to be. We want it to be about getting people healthy. So you see that right now. You see, like, I'm a luminary in CPESN Florida, and CPESN is great because it pushes us towards an incentive-based system and making money in getting people healthy rather than just filling scripts for sick people. So I think that, will there be some change? Yes. And there's going to be growing pains with that change. But I think that now more than ever, or at least in the decade that I have been, out of school for, stakeholders almost uniformly recognize that there's got to be something done. So they're not always in alignment on what it looks like to fix it, but I think that they all know that something needs to be fixed. So now's the time for us to show them how it can be fixed. And I don't want to sound like a football coach, because like I talk in cliches a lot, but it's like, if you're not driving the bus, then the bus might be going somewhere where you don't want to go. So like, it's not enough just to be on the bus, but like, you want to be the navigator, you want to be the driver. Like, we need to tell people now, what does it look like for pharmacists going forward? And how can we affect that change? How can we prove our worth? How can we argue that what we are in favor of is what will help our patients going forward? So I think that people have to get engaged, and you have to, if you want to secure yourself a spot in what is to come, you have to make sure that your lawmakers, that your stakeholders, that your patients, that your, that everybody is on the same page about it, and that it's that your vision is what everybody knows what you can do best for your patients. Like, what you're able to do and what, your practice is best at. So being able to say like, hey, I know that this is what's going to affect real change, and here's how we could do it. That's what we need right now. We need voices stepping up and saying, we know that there's a problem. Here's how to fix it. I really think it's that simple. It does not need to be overly complex. It just needs to be, okay, cool. We all know that there's a problem. Here's how I think that we can fix it. Yeah.
Well, we're about out of time. For anybody that's listening, I think definitely the passionate message is the time is right. Take the passionate step. Take the marriage. Get the ownership of an independent pharmacy. Speak to the House. See Taylor Swift. Talk to your patient about that Shingrix vaccine. But it's really take that step, whatever that step is, for change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, whatever it is and whatever it looks like, and my path has been incredible. It's been amazing. But I know that that's not everybody's path, and I know everybody's path, will be different. But I think it's important that we all end up together at the finish line. So, whether I did things one way and you might do things a different way, like there will definitely be one or more ways to get to the finish line. But I just think it's so important that whatever that path is that you're on, that you keep pushing forward on it and strive to get to that finish line.
Great final words. I'll let you get back to work with that. Thank you so much for joining us. Can't wait to talk to you again. Can't wait to see next time you surface in the headlines. So it's been really exciting over the past few weeks to watch. So thank you so much for everything you're doing.
I appreciate it. I enjoyed this a lot, and thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond the Scripts, presented by the Catalyst Pharmacy Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please support our channel by liking, subscribing, and clicking the notification bell so that you'll be notified anytime we post new content. To stay up to date with all of the latest independent pharmacy news and content, follow PioneerRx on your preferred social media platform.